would have been way more embarrassing if one or other of us had been dressed by that stage of the morning. But it also helps to illustrate how flexible and how convenient that sort of working environment is. And it really does make a huge difference to your work-life balance. And that wasn't suddenly an 18-hour day that started at 6 o'clock in the morning. It just meant that when I needed to do something later in the day that was a little more personal, I was in a position to do it because I'd done the critical things very, very early that day and didn't have to deal with a commute and all the other things that go with it. And a lot of those collaboration tools get you there. This is another very interesting piece of work that we're doing at CSIRO. The ability to take gestures from a human face and translate them directly onto an avatar real time is already fairly cool. But one of the things that is quite unique about the work that's been going on is that previously it would have been necessary to put a number of reference markers on the human so that the software and the imaging can be referenced to those markers so that you can do very, very accurate motion detection based on those reference markers. We have now developed the capability to use the human face itself as a reference set of markers. So without any impact on the human face, we can take gestures and emotions and things and translate them directly into an avatar. That's a very, very interesting technology. And can you imagine, we are actually considering or working with the Department of Human Services to think about how an avatar can be represented to somebody walking in off the street looking for some Department of Human Services based services like Centrelink, and present to the user or present to the person a socially, culturally acceptable avatar to suit them and provide via that avatar a whole range of different people talking to them without them knowing, because they suddenly feel like they've got an expert who knows everything, but in fact what they're getting is fragments of experts from all over the country feeding through an acceptable environment to them. That's a government use of something like this. I mean, not to mention the interesting opportunities for the entertainment industry itself, which is also an area where we're engaging. But this also leads to some very interesting things, that this facial recognition stuff is not just about recreating avatars, it's also about being able to see things that the human eye can't detect. You know, that sub-microsecond muscle tweak that suddenly can give you a message that somebody's telling you a little lie might be very useful to the defence in a legal battle. The ability to measure somebody's heartbeat through the micro blushes that happen in their eyes every time your heart beats remotely via a camera is very cool, and we can do that. There's lots of very interesting things that come from being able to do facial recognition in very, very high precision. So that's kind of fun. Another really interesting technology is this 3D remote assistance capability. I don't have a video for this one, but what this is trying to represent is the person on the left is, let's say, a remote mine servicing manager out in some very remote location. The person on the right is perhaps an expert in a particular technology that is out on that mine. The person on the right can see exactly what the person on the left sees, and vice versa. But the person on the right's hands are in fact visible to the person on the left. So the expert hands can guide real time the person on the left. Now, normally this would be done through a head-up display on glasses, so that it's an augmented reality kind of environment. It's being done here on an external screen, just simply so you can see that the other person's hands are actually in the field of view there on the screen. Now, when I was playing around with this, I was being the person on the left being guided, and the person on the right was a young Chinese scientist who didn't have great English, and he was trying to describe something quite sophisticated to me, and his English just wasn't quite cutting it. He was able to show me what he wanted to do, and when he realised that I was able to interpret what he was showing me how to do, and I could just do it, he actually completely stopped talking. And that was a bit of an epiphany moment for me, because I realised, hey, this is not just about people assisting you. This is anybody from any cultural background, from any language background, talking to anybody else in another language environment without actually needing to talk. Showing you is worth far more. I mean, we were playing around with Lego and we were trying to describe some quite esoteric moves. You can imagine what that could be like if you're playing around with a very exotic instrument or a very large piece of technology that you've never been confronted with before. Being shown what to do has an incredible impact on all sorts of things, like vocational education. Imagine a physiotherapist being able to show you, if you're exercising that muscle, 3 degrees of movement over there might make all the difference to your exercise, and doing it over here is really not going to have any effect at all. You've got to be in their office to do that today. Well, this kind of thing would allow you to do that in a remote sense. And you remember earlier I mentioned remote ultrasounds. This kind of capability could work in that environment to show somebody who isn't experienced at doing an ultrasound. You need to move it just a few centimetres to the left or right. You've got to tilt the head of the scanner just a tiny fraction to get a better view of somebody's gallbladder. There could be all manner of specialist instructions that could come through this that wouldn't really work through just speech. And so we're looking at all sorts of interesting applications for this, but it is already deployed in a couple of mining remote sites as an experiment at this point. Another very interesting project is the Telepresence Museum Robot. We just launched this in the National Museum in Canberra, and what's very interesting about this is the very clever thing that this has got is, in fact, the three-dimensional, the 360-degree camera that sits on top of this, not three-dimensional, the 360-degree camera that sits on top of this, that is constantly taking video in all directions. And what this robot does is it joins a tour of real people with a real curator showing real people around the museum. It joins that tour and allows for up to 15 or 16 people to join remotely into that tour and interact with that curator in exactly the same way as the people who are actually physically on the tour. That interaction is, each individual can look at any part of that 360-degree image, video at any given time. And you can see this is it in real service. The images on the screen there, they're just representations of the individuals who are joining remotely. The blackened one is the one that the person is talking to, and what they're actually looking at on the screen is what the person remotely can see, so that the curator can see exactly what the person is seeing remotely and can discuss that as though they were on the tour themselves. So what that means is if there's a number of objects in that particular part of the museum that are of interest, every individual remotely could be looking at a different element of that themselves. Now, there are lots and lots of potentially interesting applications for this technology. And one of them, I was recently up in Cairns and we were thinking about how we could put one in a submersible on the reef and have people remotely join reef tours and be able to interact with a diver directly, real time. Now, that has some very, very interesting challenges. The submersible part's easy. We do a lot of marine science work and the submersible part's easy, but what's not easy is getting the amount of bandwidth out of the bottom of the ocean and into the network so that you can interact with this. And that's an interesting challenge to be worked on. I guess time's nearly up, but I do want to mention a few things about the Tasmanian Sense-T, or Sensing Tasmania project. All the dots on that map are in fact existing sensor networks in Tasmania. And what we're doing in a collaboration with the University of Tasmania, CSIRO, and the Tasmanian government is starting to federate all of this information together and create some really, really interesting effects for the agriculture and aquaculture businesses initially, but with an expectation that it will extend to a very, very wide variety of projects right across the state. And we see some fascinating and massive export opportunities for this as well. So a couple of really quick examples where we're detecting the environmental conditions in the grape growing regions. Remember, Tasmania is a cold climate grape environment. Botrytis is a problem there. When the conditions are just right, botrytis can spring up very, very quickly. It has to be treated if the conditions are appearing, otherwise it will appear. It's too late, the crop is written off, lost for the year, to do it again next year. We are now able to detect that environment early enough to treat the vines early enough that there is no risk of botrytis. We hope that before the end of this year we will have enough evidence from this year's crop that next year we can take that nationally and hopefully export that internationally relatively soon. And that's built from very low cost sensors, and they're not very sophisticated sensors, well they're very clever, but they're quite basic sensors, but the issue is what do you do with the information? How do you get that to the agriculturalist quickly enough to deal with it? We're also, at the same time, doing a little project with oysters. Every time it rains, the state health department tells the oyster growers they're not allowed to harvest for a period until the water purifies from all the runoff that comes from a rain event. We're now able to predict rain, tell the harvesting crews that they can harvest right up to the point where rain might happen, detect the conditions in the water sufficiently accurately that we can tell the health department when it's actually clean enough to actually turn harvesting back on again. And that has significantly improved the productivity rate of oyster farming. We're now also extending this project to remotely measure oysters' heartbeats, because that forms a bit of a proxy for the health of the oyster community and for the water conditions in which they are living. And so that's a very interesting extension of this project. And my surveys so far have suggested that half the people who like oysters natural stop liking them quite so much when they know that they've got a heartbeat. But if you think about it, it's a living animal, it's going to have a heartbeat. And we've been eating them for a long time. But Kilpatrick, I guess, is getting more popular. And finally, another little project which is emerging now is exporting salmon to the Japanese market. Tasmania is good at salmon. It exports to the Japanese market. The fish in Japan are sold basically as the cheapest fish in the market for no reason other than the information about those fish are not provided with the fish. We're now able to provide enough information that that fish moves to the premium, most valuable fish in the market without actually changing the fish at all, by just providing digital information that supports the quality of the environment and the environment that it is used to transport to the Japanese market as well. Now, what starts to become classic digital economy stuff is when information from each of these is starting to flow into the other. And we can worry about the runoff from the vineyard affecting the oyster farming. And as we build more and more sensor networks and federate the data and share it openly and have applications emerging right across the market, we expect to see a huge number of linkages that we don't even know about yet. And the final thing I just wanted to mention, I know my time is up, but this is pretty interesting. We're doing quite a lot of social media monitoring. We monitor every tweet that happens, even the ones happening here, every single day. And we can detect very interesting effects. We are using this capability with all manner of government services right now to do things like detect early earthquake activity, to detect bushfire activity, to detect flood activity in very geographically specific areas with very, very interesting effects. And this particular river diagram, which is one of our visualisation tools, highlighted that we were seeing some negative sentiment about CSIRO at one point, because indeed this subject was being talked about by a scientist during a radio interview, and the radio journalist picked up on the fact that, hey, this is Big Brother watching us all on our Twitter accounts, and that's pretty bad. And the story started to get out of control as a really bad thing. So we were able to see that emerging, get the head scientist of that particular group on the evening news that night to talk about all of the cool things that government is using it for, which really give us huge benefit. And within 24 hours, we were also able to use our own Twittering to engage with those conversations and provide some more facts rather than letting it get just emotionally out of control. Within 24 hours, the issue was completely gone. Now, I can't predict exactly what would have happened if we'd not intervened, but that intervention really helped minimise the impact on our brand for that particular event. And those sorts of things are being done every day using tools like this. And the very final thing is this very interesting laser mapping thing. And I know this looks silly, but what this is a handheld laser scanning capability. And as you walk around this building or any mine or any underground thing, or anything that's not out in the open, in fact it works out in the open too, but what's clever about this is that it works indoors. And you end up with real-time, a 3D map of that environment. Very accurate, very precise, within a centimetre or less.